This, of course, is the big moment in American politics. Millions of Americans have cast their vote in these crucial midterm elections. Polling is closed across multiple states in the United States of America. Although in western part of the United States, the polling is still on, but votes are being counted. Early leads and trends are, of course, coming in, and in some places, elections have also been called. And what is interesting is that Donald Trump's former White House spokesperson, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, has now been elected as the governor of Arkansas. With this, she's become the first woman governor to serve in the office in the state.
I look forward to being Arkansas's very best governor for the next 8 years. Thank you so much.
So that, of course, was Sarah Huckabee Sanders stating that she looks forward to be the best governor for the state of Arkansas. Meanwhile, in Florida, which is witnessing a red wave, the incumbent governor, Ron DeSantis, has managed to hold on to his seat. In a strong statement, Ron DeSantis said that he will not surrender to the woke mob. Now, experts say that this could, of course, be a dig at the left and the liberal wing in the United States. Now, remember, Ron DeSantis is also an individual who is tipped as a potential candidate for the 2024 presidential election from the Republican side. He's seen as a rising star of America's political right wing and also as a potential rival to Donald Trump.
Now, while our country flounders due to failed leadership in Washington, Florida is on the right track. I believe the survival of the American experiment requires a revival of true American principles. Florida has proved that it can be done. We fight the woke in the legislature. We fight the woke in the schools. We fight the woke in the corporations. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
All right, some pretty interesting statements there by Ron DeSantis. Meanwhile, in the Senate race, incumbent Marco Rubio has made his victory speech after Val Demings conceded defeat. A former Orlando police chief, Demings was the underdog against Marco Rubio, and the Republican has successfully sought a third term in office.
The most important thing is we're not just going to elect Republican senators. We're going to elect new people with fire in the belly, who know why they're running. They're running to save America. They're running to fight for the working people of this country. They're going to be up there to work and fight on behalf of the men and women that are the backbone of this great nation. Because we are going to do whatever it takes. That's my commitment to you. I am more energized and excited about working in the Senate than I've been at any other time, because I believe we are on the cusp of a new generation of leadership in this Republican Party that will restore common sense, that will put hardworking Americans first, and that will leave for our children what they deserve to inherit, the greatest country in the history of the world. Thank you, guys. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump flew to his home state to energize the voters and to root for the candidates, but the cracks between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis are clear as daylight. In one of Donald Trump's rallies, he also called Ron DeSantis as Ron DeSanctimonious. Meanwhile, results from the state of Massachusetts are out as well. According to several media networks in the United States, the election has been called in favor of the Democrat candidate Maura Healey. And she will now be Governor Healey and will be America's first openly lesbian governor. 51-year-old Healey flipped the seat from the Republicans, and she's comfortably defeated her rival Jeff Diehl. So the 2022 midterm elections are shaping up to be the most consequential in the nation's history. With the control of the Congress at stake, all 435 seats in the House of the Congress and 35 of the 100 seats of the Senate are on the line. Dozens of governorships, secretaries of states and attorney generals are also on the ballot. The midterm elections will also determine the future of the American President Joe Biden's agenda and will test the viability of another White House run by Donald Trump. And according to data from the US election project, more than 42 million Americans, of course, voted ahead of the election day, either by mail or in person. But remember, voting is still on in some parts of the United States of America. The voting process is not closed yet, and votes are being counted in many of these states. The early leads and trends are beginning to come in, and in some places the elections have also been called. And to give us more updates in terms of what, of course, is happening, we are being joined in by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live from New York and is, of course, been tracking all the developments as they are emerging. Now, Susan, let me, of course, begin by asking you this. This is a moment where we'll also need to look at the crucial swing states in the United States of America. Give us an update in terms of what are the early leads and trends telling us about the crucial swing states there.
Yeah, a lot of the races that we were looking at in the last few weeks are now, believe it or not, too close to call. One of them being Georgia, between Raphael Warnock and Walker on the one hand, and then you have Pennsylvania, John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz. The reasons for these are, again, regarding those mail-in ballots, the way they're going to be counted. They're just traditionally extremely low, slow states in counting their mailing ballots on the one hand, and then we have to wait and for the West Coast for their polling stations to close. That's going to be Nevada, a state to look at as well. And then, of course, we have a state like Ohio that's really going towards red with J.D. Vance. You know, he was that famous businessman turned politician with his famous book, Hilly Billy Elegy, and a Trump supporter against the incumbent. So, you know, those are the races that we're looking at right now. But I do want to say by right now, which is about 11 p.m., a little after 11 p.m. on the East Coast local time, that sort of red wave that we were talking about and a lot of polls were expecting, at least, that's not something that we're seeing right now. It's too close to call right now, but Democrats aren't doing too terribly, at least in the House seats. In the Senate, we're also looking very closely as well.
Absolutely indeed, Susan. Do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, we are also joined in by Ms. Reena Shah, who's a political advisor and also a former Republican strategist. And she, of course, is joining us from Washington, D.C. Now, Ms. Shah, looking in terms of the early leads and trends that are coming in, it does appear, although it's still very early to call this, it does appear that the Republicans seem to have a clear advantage. What do you think the Republicans are doing right? Or is it that Joe Biden, because of the war in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis, is already so bogged down that people in the United States would have swung to the right anyway? What do you think is happening?
You know, I think it's important to zoom out and look at this for what this is. There are roughly 35 toss-ups. And usually in these toss-up seats, one party wins the lion's share of them. So when you look at what the Republicans were poised to do tonight, and what we'll learn this week, is that, yes, they were going to capitalize on the sense that there is frustration about the economy and inflation, with the price of daily commodities on our shelves still pretty high. Of course, there's less pain at the pump than there was earlier in the year, but Republicans have seized the message on the economy. And also, they are going hard on crime as well, and saying that Democrats have failed American citizens from coast to coast when it comes to public safety in terms of the rise in crime, violent crimes. And again, this is something that Republicans have found that entryway and are finding a great deal of success. When you look at the issue of abortion, Democrats are doing better. And so you're hearing Republicans talk less about the Supreme Court's overturn of Roe versus Wade. Anytime you look at a party in power in the White House, you've got to assume that the opposite party has a good chance. I'm not a gambling person, but right. The Vegas odds are looking pretty good for Democrats to keep the White House in 2024 if Republicans take control of the U.S. House of Representatives tonight.
That's a very interesting sort of a flip that happens in American politics. Very interesting there. Meanwhile, what is interesting is that there's another Republican backed by former President Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, who's now being reported to have won the Senate race in the state of Ohio. The race, of course, had become surprisingly competitive with Democrat lawmaker Tim Ryan. And interestingly, the win for the Republicans does not represent a gain of a seat in the 100-member Senate, because this is the contenders who are vying to replace the retiring Republican Senator Rob Portman. So this, of course, is the latest update that has in fact come in from the state of Ohio. Now, Susan, I want you to weigh in on an important aspect in terms of how the midterm elections will determine the politics in America in the next 2 years. Because it does appear, because it's still all in the realm of speculation, it is hard to in fact, make a guess, stick one's neck out. But it does appear that Joe Biden may end up losing control of the House of Legislature in the United States. With that, he'd of course become a lame duck president. And considering as to how polarized the politics in America is and the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans are, to what extent do you think Joe Biden will be able to push through the agenda and get it passed through the legislatures in the United States?
His approach of my way or the highway for the last 2 years, and it ended up with him having extremely low poll numbers. He's one of the least favored presidents in contemporary history, and for good reason, because Americans just don't feel like their lives are better than it was 2 years ago when Joe Biden took office. And he also was not genuine and honest with the American people in saying that he was going to bring the country together. He's one of the most divisive figures of politics, again, in contemporary history, while saying that the other side is the one that's sowing division. So there's a lot of soul searching to do, not only for Joe Biden, but for the Democrats in general, to how they want to continue, whether or not they want to work with the new government on Capitol Hill, or they want to continue to take this sort of follow the progressive link, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and their agendas in fear of losing, and then lose again more than half of the country. So it depends on what kind of Democrat president Joe Biden wants to be. We talked about Bill Clinton, 1994. He ultimately decided to extend an olive branch and work with Newt Gingrich and the Republicans, and that was to the Democrats' favor ultimately, and to the American people's favor. But whether or not Joe Biden and the Democrats really have the appetite to work across the aisle is yet to be seen. I mean, they're so polarized. The right and the left on Capitol Hill is so different right now that it's hard to imagine something like that would happen.
Absolutely, indeed. So in the past, every time the president, of course, did not have the support of the legislature, the majority in the legislature, he's, of course, had to rely on the other party to get the legislations through. So, Rina, if I can ask you to weigh in on this, do you think Joe Biden can actually, do this? This is a hard task for him. If he ends up losing the majority in the Senate and in the Congress, can he actually reach out to the Republicans enough so that they also back his legislations? Do you think that is something that can happen? Or have things soured way too much between the Republicans and the Democrats, and the Republicans may not wish to play ball with Joe Biden?
Well, the first thing to note is that anything that happens on Capitol Hill happens because both sides come to the center and they meet in the middle, and they have to pass laws together. That's just simply the truth about how our system works. And sure, things are hyper-polarized in this country, but as somebody who served 2 former Republican members of Congress as a senior aide, I can tell you we've gotten a lot done with the other side as a Republican during that era. I can tell you that there were moments where, there were differences set aside in the interest of getting something done for their constituents. That still happens today. It just doesn't get talked about as much. And it's important to note that President Joe Biden comes from that era. He was on Capitol Hill serving in Congress for many years before he became vice president to former President Barack Obama. So this is a person that believes in bipartisanship, has shown it demonstrably throughout his life. And I wouldn't be surprised, in fact, if our system gets better with a Congress that's controlled by another party. That is simply a good news for democracy, because it means that we are doing what the founders intended, having each branch check each other's powers. And another thing to note is that in the modern era of American politics, presidents have expanded their executive power. So they do a lot more with executive orders, meaning they use it as a tool to get things done when Congress isn't doing something they want to do. So these are really important, good things that we can hope for if tonight goes to the Republicans.
All right, very interesting there. This of course, is something that will be looked at in terms of how closely will Joe Biden be working with Republicans to get through his legislations. But Susan, this is an election that has consequences that go far beyond the borders of the United States of America. The war in Ukraine is also being looked at in context of how it will be impacted by the midterm elections in the United States. Now, Joe Biden so far has backed the Ukrainians and has sent a lot of financial and military aid. But if he were to lose the Congress and the Senate, do you think that may impact in terms of the amount of military aid the United States would send to Ukraine?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Democrats and the Republicans, when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have had somewhat of a united voice in supporting Ukraine. I think if the Republicans take over, they're just going to be more concerned about how much money is spent and, have a little more, be a little more conservative when it comes to spending, as their constituents have wanted. It's somewhat of a taboo when you talk about, aiding Ukraine and financially. And when you talk to a lot of Americans, they do have this concern that, how much money is being spent on Ukraine and how much is being spent here at home. And while they do support America's, foreign policy agenda, I think there is that conversation that's uncomfortable, that's hovering over a lot of these officials that will be elected. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But I think everyone's on the same page when it comes to that aspect of it.
They're all on the same page in the principle of supporting Ukraine. But how much money should the American nation actually be sending to Ukraine in terms of military and financial aid? That is where the points of divergence will arrive. And that is where it'll be very interesting to see as to how much the Republicans and the Democrats would want to work with each other. Now, Rina, I want to ask you a question looking forward into 2024 presidential election. What is in fact being looked at with the midterm elections in the United States at this moment is how far and how well do those candidates who are backed by Donald Trump actually perform in these elections. If they were to perform pretty well, then it is being said that Donald Trump's chances of running for the presidency actually strengthened pretty dramatically. How do you view Donald Trump's contention in terms of the candidates that he's backed and with the prospects that he may be running for 2024?
Donald Trump, he looms large in the Republican Party today. He has a tremendous impact on the type of candidates that are coming out and running in races across the country. We see that at play today. One unique strategy that Democrats employed this election was to, in fact, amplify certain far-right candidates that were election deniers in this year's election. They did that as a strategy to try to guarantee that they could keep control of the U.S. House of Representatives. I was one of the people that thought that would backfire. And I genuinely believe that's a strategy that we see at play, that it is backfiring right now. You're seeing moderate Republicans not want to be part of the party because Trump is that big of a stronghold on how they operate and whether they can win or not. Either you fall in line and support Trump or you get out of the way and you vote for Democrats.
Very interesting there, although a lot of people would say that Donald Trump is the crowd puller and a lot of people in fact gravitate towards the Republican Party because of Donald Trump, although he is a polarizing figure even within the Republican Party itself. Thank you very much indeed to both Rina Shah and for Susan Tehrani for joining us in this broadcast and getting us those insights there. This, remember, is a crucial election. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.